Arthur Penhaligon believed in love the way an architect believes in foundations. He saw it as the essential structure upon which a life was built. From a young age, he was a collector of moments, a hoarder of grand romantic gestures he'd seen in old black and white films. He imagined love wasn't just a feeling, but a destination. It was a perfectly designed house with sunlit rooms and a garden that never withered. He didn't just want a partner, he wanted a co-architect for his soul. His heart was an open blueprint, waiting for the right person to come along and help him build something beautiful and lasting. He was convinced that somewhere out there, a perfect love story was waiting just for him. This unwavering belief made him a magnet for romance. Arthur had a way of looking at the world that made everything seem a little more magical. A simple walk in the park became an epic journey. A shared cup of coffee felt like a sacred ritual. He wasn't just optimistic, he was a devout follower in the church of grand romance. He saw potential in every smile, a promise in every shared glance. His friends would often tease him, calling him a dreamer, but Arthur didn't mind. He knew with absolute certainty that his one true love was not a fantasy. She was just around the corner, waiting for their story to begin. He carried this idealism into his 20s and 30s, a hopeful traveler on a quest. Each new relationship was a new beginning, a fresh page. He would fall in love with the way a woman tucked her hair behind her ear, or the sound of her laughter echoing in a quiet room. He learned their favorite songs, memorized their coffee orders, and celebrated the small forgotten anniversaries. For Arthur, these were not just details, they were the bricks and mortar of connection. He was building, always building, toward a future he could see so clearly in his mind's eye. A future filled with shared blankets, inside jokes, and a love that could weather any storm. But the problem with building a dream house is that reality often has different plans. Arthur's idealism was both his greatest strength and his most profound weakness. It allowed him to love with an intensity that was breathtaking, but it also set an impossibly high standard. He was searching for a perfection that existed only in his imagination. He didn't realize that real love wasn't about finding a flawless person. It was about finding an imperfect person and building a life together, cracks and all. His journey was destined to be a long one, filled with beautiful, almost perfect structures that, for one reason or another, could never quite be called home. Amelia was the first woman who felt like she could be the one. She was a librarian with eyes the color of warm honey and a laugh that sounded like wind chimes. They met on a rainy Tuesday in a dusty, forgotten corner of the city library. Arthur was searching for books on classic architecture, and she was reshelving novels. Their hands brushed as they both reached for the same worn copy of The Great Gatsby. It was a moment straight out of one of his beloved films. For Arthur, it was a sign, a perfect cinematic beginning to what he was sure would be a perfect cinematic love story. He was instantly, hopelessly smitten. Their courtship was a whirlwind of shared passions. They spent weekends exploring old bookshops, their fingers tracing the spines of forgotten stories. Amelia loved the smell of old paper, and Arthur loved the way she read passages aloud to him, her voice soft and steady. They would have picnics in the park, Amelia reading poetry while Arthur sketched her, trying to capture the gentle curve of her smile. She was everything he thought he wanted. She was kind, intelligent, and she understood his romantic heart. She didn't laugh at his grand gestures. She cherished them. He was building his dream with her, brick by loving brick. The problem with Amelia was her deep, unshakable roots. She was born in the small town they lived in, and she had no desire to ever leave. Her family was there, her history was there, her entire world was contained within its familiar streets. Arthur, on the other hand, had a wanderer's soul. He dreamed of seeing the world, of sketching the cathedrals of Europe and the temples of Asia. He wanted to show Amelia the romance of Paris, the history of Rome. He tried to convince her, painting pictures with his words of all the adventures they could have together. He wanted to build their life on a global scale, but Amelia's foundation was local, built on the solid ground of home and family. She couldn't understand his need to roam, "Everything I could ever want is right here, Arthur," she would say, her honey-colored eyes filled with a sad confusion. The end came not with a bang, but with a slow, heartbreaking realization. He loved her, and she loved him, but they were architects with two completely different blueprints. He wanted to build a ship to sail the world, and she wanted to build a house with a deep, immovable foundation. Their love was nearly perfect, but their dreams were facing in opposite directions. So, with a heavy heart, Arthur packed his bags and his sketchbook and walked away. After Amelia, Arthur found himself in a bustling city, a place of endless possibilities. It was here he met Clara. She was a painter, a vibrant splash of color in a world that had started to feel grey. Clara lived her life with a passionate intensity that both thrilled and terrified him. Her apartment was a chaotic masterpiece of paint-splattered canvases, half-finished sculptures, and jars filled with brushes. She smelled of turpentine and fresh coffee. She saw the world not in lines and structures, but in light and shadow, in bold strokes and subtle hues. For Arthur, she was a revelation, a completely different kind of art. Their love affair was a storm of creativity and emotion. They would stay up all night talking about art, life, and everything in between. He would watch, mesmerized, as she attacked a blank canvas, transforming it into a window to another world. She, in turn, was fascinated by his meticulous sketches, his love for order and form. They were opposites, yet they complemented each other perfectly. He grounded her, and she taught him how to fly. Arthur felt his heart expanding, making room for a kind of love he had never imagined. This, he thought, was it. This was the wild, passionate love that poets wrote about. Clara was a force of nature, but a storm cannot be contained. Her moods were as unpredictable as her art. Some days she would be alight with inspiration, pulling him into her whirlwind of creative energy. On other days, a darkness would descend, a deep, impenetrable melancholy that pushed him away. He tried to understand, to be the steady anchor in her turbulent sea. He would bring her tea, sit with her in silence, and try to sketch the sadness out of her eyes. But he couldn't. Her inner world was a landscape he was not allowed to enter, a place where she had to walk alone. The end was as chaotic as their beginning. It came during a fight, a stupid argument about something neither of them could remember later. But it was the final crack in a foundation that had been shaking for months. "You want to fix me, Arthur?" she had shouted, her eyes blazing with tears and frustration. "I'm not one of your buildings. I'm not a problem to be solved." And in that moment, he knew she was right. He loved her, but he couldn't live with the constant uncertainty, the feeling of walking on eggshells. He craved stability, a calm harbor. Clara was a beautiful, magnificent storm, but he was not the sailor who could navigate her waters. Their love was an unfinished canvas, vibrant and full of promise, but ultimately left incomplete. Years passed. Arthur's hair began to show hints of silver at the temples. He had achieved professional success, his architectural designs praised for their elegance and heart. On a work trip to Paris, he met Isabelle. She was a pastry chef, the owner of a small, charming patisserie in Montmartre. She had a smile as sweet as her creations and a calm, centered presence that felt like coming home. Isabelle was different from the others. There was no overwhelming drama, no fundamental conflict of dreams. She was simply, wonderfully herself. And Arthur, now in his 40s, found himself falling in love more quietly, more deeply than ever before. Their romance unfolded against the impossibly romantic backdrop of Paris. They walked along the Seine at dusk, the lights of the city twinkling like fallen stars. They shared croissants in her sun-drenched kitchen, the air filled with the scent of butter and sugar. Isabelle listened to his stories of past loves with a gentle, knowing sympathy. She was not intimidated by his history. She saw it as the foundation that had led him to her. Arthur felt a sense of peace he had never known. This wasn't the cinematic love of his youth or the passionate storm of his 30s. This was something real, something steady. This, he was certain, was the final design. Isabelle had a daughter, a bright, curious 10-year-old named Chloe. Arthur, who had never considered himself a family man, found his heart captured by this small, serious girl. He would take her to museums, patiently explaining the history behind the art and architecture. He helped her with her homework and taught her how to draw. He saw a future he had never dared to sketch before, a life with Isabel, a home with Chloe. It was a complete picture, a family. He started looking at apartments, imagining a life where he could wake up to the smell of Isabel's baking and the sound of Chloe's laughter every day. But life, in its cruel and indifferent way, had another plan. Just as Arthur was preparing to propose, to finally lay the cornerstone of his life's dream, Isabel received devastating news. Her ex-husband, Chloe's father, had been in a terrible accident hundreds of miles away in the south of France. He would need constant long-term care, and Isabel, with her boundless sense of duty and compassion, knew she had to go. She had to be there for him, and she had to keep Chloe close to her father. "It isn't fair," she wept in Arthur's arms. "We were so close. We were nearly perfect." And just like that, the Parisian blueprint was torn apart, a victim of circumstances beyond their control. Love wasn't enough to overcome this. In his early 50s, Arthur returned to his home city, his heart aching with the ghost of his Parisian dream. He was slower now, more reflective. He had stopped searching for perfection, resigned to the idea that perhaps a great love was not in his future. And then he met Maya. She wasn't his type at all. She was a landscape gardener, with dirt permanently under her fingernails and a loud, infectious laugh. She was practical, down to earth, and had little time for grand romantic gestures. She found his idealism amusing but endearing. She didn't fit into any of his old blueprints, and that was precisely what drew him to her. Their relationship was built on a foundation of comfortable companionship. There were no dramatic declarations of love or whirlwind adventures. Instead, there were quiet evenings spent in the garden Maya was designing for his small city home. He would sit and sketch while she worked, her hands shaping the earth with a gentle, confident touch. They talked about everything and nothing. She taught him the names of flowers, and he taught her about the importance of perspective in art. It was an easy love, a love that didn't demand to be anything more than what it was. It was a different kind of design, one he hadn't considered. Arthur found himself surprisingly happy. Maya didn't need him to be a romantic hero. She just needed him to be Arthur. She teased him about his old movies but would still watch them with him, her head resting comfortably on his shoulder. For the first time, Arthur felt like he didn't have to perform. He could just be. He started to think that maybe this was the real thing. Maybe love wasn't about fireworks and grand designs. Maybe it was about finding someone you could sit in comfortable silence with, someone whose presence felt as natural and necessary as the air you breathe. But as the years settled around them, a quiet unease grew in Arthur's heart. He loved Maya, he truly did, but the old dreamer in him, the architect of grand romantic destinies, felt a sense of longing. This was a good life, a happy life, but was it the epic love story he had spent his entire existence searching for? The passion, the all-consuming connection he craved, wasn't there. It was a warm, pleasant house, but it didn't have the soaring ceilings of his dreams. He realized with a profound sense of guilt and sadness that he was the flaw in this nearly perfect relationship. He was unable to let go of the ghost of an ideal, and it was unfair to Maya, who deserved someone who could love her completely, without reservation. They parted as friends with a quiet, mutual understanding. Arthur entered his 60s alone, but not entirely lonely. His life was full of the memories of the women he had loved. Honestly, he was like a curator of a museum dedicated to his own heart. Each relationship had left its mark, a precious artifact he would take out and examine from time to time. He could still smell the old books from his time with Amelia, still see the vibrant chaos of Clara's studio, still taste the sweetness of Isabel's croissants. He could feel the comfortable weight of Maya's head on his shoulder. These were not ghosts that haunted him, but rather gentle spirits that kept him company. They were reminders that he had lived and that he had loved. He continued to work, but his pace slowed. His designs became more thoughtful, more infused with a sense of history and emotion. He built spaces for other people to live their lives in, to build their families in. He found a quiet satisfaction in this. He was the architect who designed beautiful homes but never lived in one himself. He would sometimes walk past houses he had designed, catching glimpses of families through the windows, a child's birthday party, a couple dancing in the kitchen. He felt a pang of longing, a whisper of what might have been, but it was not a bitter feeling. It was a gentle, melancholic acceptance. His search for love didn't stop entirely, but it changed. The desperate quest of his youth had softened into a quiet openness. He went on dates, met interesting women, and enjoyed their company. But the fire, the urgent need to build something monumental, was gone. He had become more of an observer of love than a participant. He saw it in the young couples holding hands in the park, in the elderly pairs bickering affectionately at the grocery store. He saw its beauty in all its forms, and he appreciated it with the discerning eye of a connoisseur. He had loved so many nearlies that he understood the delicate, fragile nature of the real thing. Time was a constant, undeniable presence. Arthur felt it in his aching joints on cold mornings, saw it in the new wrinkles that etched their way across his face. His friends were grandparents now, their lives filled with the noise and joy of sprawling families. At holiday gatherings, he was the beloved, eccentric uncle who told the best stories. He brought thoughtful gifts and listened with genuine interest to tales of scraped knees and school plays. He was surrounded by love, but it was a different kind of love. It was the love of friends and family, a warm and steady glow, but it couldn't fill the specific space he had always reserved for a partner, for his co-architect. In his 70s, Arthur lived in a small, elegant house he had designed for himself. It was not a family home. It was a house for one, a sanctuary filled with books, art, and the accumulated treasures of a long and interesting life. Every object told a story. On the wall hung a small, vibrant painting Clara had given him. On a bookshelf sat a worn copy of The Great Gatsby, a relic from his time with Amelia. A delicate porcelain dish from Isabel's patisserie held his keys. The garden, beautifully designed and cared for by Maya, bloomed with color every spring. His house was not empty. It was filled with the presence of his past. He spent his days in a comfortable routine. He would wake with the sun, make a pot of strong coffee, and read the newspaper in his garden. He still sketched, his hands a bit shaky now, but his eye as sharp as ever. He drew the birds that visited his feeder, the changing light on the leaves, the faces of strangers he saw on his slow walks through the neighborhood. His sketchbooks were a diary of his life, a visual record of a world seen through the eyes of a hopeless romantic. He was no longer building for the future. He was documenting the beauty of the present. Loneliness was a visitor, but not a permanent resident. It would arrive sometimes on quiet evenings, a silent guest sitting in the empty chair across from him. In those moments, the weight of his choices, of his nearlies, would feel heavy. He would wonder what life would have been like if he had stayed with Amelia, or if he had learned to navigate Clara's storms, or if tragedy hadn't stolen Isabel away. He would think of Maya and the comfortable life he had walked away from. These thoughts were tinged with regret, a soft sorrow for the family he never built, for the children he never had. But these moments of sadness would always pass, like clouds drifting across the sun. He would get up, put on some music, and walk through his house of memories. He would touch the painting, trace the spine of the book, and smile. He had not failed. He had loved. He had loved deeply, passionately, and with his whole heart, time and time again. His life was not the grand cathedral he had once dreamed of building, but it was a collection of beautiful, exquisitely crafted chapels. Each one was a testament to a love that was real and true, even if it wasn't forever, and in its own way that was a masterpiece. Arthur's final years were peaceful. His body grew frail, but his spirit remained undimmed. He had outlived many of his friends, and the world had changed in ways he could barely comprehend. But the fundamental things, the things he had always held dear, remained. The beauty of a sunset, the kindness of a stranger, the power of a good story. These were the constants in his life. He found joy in small things, the warmth of a sunbeam on his face, the taste of a perfectly ripe strawberry, the sound of children playing in a distant park. His world had shrunk, but his appreciation for it had grown immensely. He knew his time was coming to an end. There was no fear, only a quiet curiosity. He had spent his life designing structures meant to last for generations, and now his own structure was nearing its completion. He thought about his legacy. He had no children to carry on his name, no wife to mourn his passing. From the outside, his life might seem a sad one, a story of failure and solitude. But Arthur knew better. His legacy was not in bloodlines or property. It was written in the hearts of the women he had loved and in the memories they had created together. One evening, as the sun began its slow descent, casting long golden shadows across his room, Arthur felt a profound sense of contentment wash over him. He was sitting in his favorite armchair, a sketchbook resting in his lap. He wasn't thinking of any one woman, but of all of them. He saw Amelia's smile, heard Clara's laugh, felt Isabel's gentle touch, and remembered Maya's easy companionship. They were all there with him, not as ghosts of what was lost, but as the vibrant essential threads that made up the tapestry of his life. He had loved them all. He had been loved by them all. His breathing slowed, becoming as soft and gentle as the fading light. He closed his eyes, a faint smile on his lips. He was not afraid. He was simply turning the final page of a well-read book. His life had been a hopeless romantic's journey, a long and winding road filled with near misses and beautiful detours. He had never reached the destination he'd set out for, the perfect, everlasting love. But he had discovered something else along the way, a life rich with love, filled with moments of breathtaking beauty. And as he took his last peaceful breath, Arthur Penhaligon knew with absolute certainty that it had been enough. It had been more than enough. Arthur Penhaligon died as he had lived for much of his life, alone but not lonely. His passing was quiet, discovered by a neighbor who noticed his newspapers piling up. There was no grand funeral, just a small, simple service attended by a few old colleagues, the children of his long-departed friends, and surprisingly Maya. She stood at the back, her eyes soft with a fond, sad memory of the kind, dreaming man who could never quite let himself be happy with the love she had offered. She placed a single, perfect white rose on his casket, a final, gentle gesture for the man who loved grand ones. His house was sold, its contents scattered. The painting from Clara ended up in an auction, its history unknown to the new owner. The book from Amelia was donated to a local library, finding its way back to the world of shelves and silence. The porcelain dish from Isabel was likely wrapped in newspaper and packed away in a box. The physical artifacts of his loves were dispersed, but their essence remained. His legacy wasn't in the things he left behind, but in the unseen impact he had on the lives he had touched. Each woman he had loved was changed by him, just as he was changed by them. His story was not a tragedy. It was a testament to the act of loving itself. Arthur's life challenged the conventional definition of success. He didn't achieve the fairy tale ending, the wife, the children, the house with the white picket fence. By society's standards, he had failed, but his life was a powerful argument for a different kind of fulfillment. He demonstrated that a life can be rich and meaningful even without a single lifelong partnership. His journey was about the search, about the hope, and about the profound beauty found in the nearlies and the almosts. In the end, Arthur Penhaligon's story is a bittersweet melody. It is a reminder that love is not a destination to be reached, but a journey to be experienced. His heart, though broken many times, was never closed. It remained open, hopeful, and capable of immense affection until the very end. He never found his one true love, but he found love in many forms, in many places, with many people. He built a life not of stone and mortar, but of moments and memories, and it was a beautiful life full of warmth and humor and sorrow, a nearly perfect story about the imperfect, glorious search for love.